In less than a minute, a 30-year campaign to completely control the global narrative of the British monarchy evaporated in the cold reflection of a locked, red-flashing computer screen. What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors, as her most trusted public relations executives were abruptly denied access to the royal intranet and physically escorted from the central communications hub, is a devastating truth. You can manipulate the tabloids, you can rewrite the official biographies, and you can demand the deferential smiles of the press corps. But you cannot hijack the digital nervous system of an institution that actually belongs to the heir to the throne. This is the story of a silent, ruthless digital execution. We are going to unpack the secret media takeover. Camilla attempted during the monarchy's most vulnerable hour how Prince William uncovered the unprecedented data grab and the devastating soundless retaliation that followed. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the profound difference between the temporary illusion of absolute public relations control and the staggering, commercial desperation of a woman who just realized she has been permanently unplugged from the Crown's global megaphone. To understand the magnitude of this sudden digital blackout, we must first rebuild the formidable illusion of power that Camilla spent 3 decades carefully constructing. Her journey from the most despised woman in Britain to the side of the king was not a happy accident. It was the most aggressive, calculated masterclass in psychological public relations and administrative warfare the modern royal family has ever seen. She weathered the bitter fallout of the 1990s and slowly, meticulously, clawed her way to the top by systematically feeding narratives to the press that erased Princess Diana's legacy and elevated her own. She operated under the assumption that time, persistence, and a ruthlessly managed media strategy would eventually rewrite history. Once she had the Archbishop of Canterbury's blessing and the spectacular crown physically placed upon her head at Westminster Abbey, her confidence mutated into a dangerous sense of absolute entitlement. She felt she had King Charles completely controlled. In her mind, the transition was complete. She began to operate as if her private communications team held the supreme authority of the state. She believed that the sprawling, highly sensitive communications bureaucracy of Buckingham Palace was entirely at her disposal, assuming she could edit the structural hierarchy of the family as easily as her aides edited a daily press release. This supreme confidence set the stage for her most audacious and ultimately fatal maneuver, executed while the king was physically compromised and stepping back from daily duties. Recognizing the terrifying vacuum of authority at the heart of the firm, Camilla reportedly saw an unprecedented opportunity to consolidate her narrative. She wanted to establish herself as the undisputed solitary voice of the monarchy, effectively creating a shadow regency through the press. Operating through backdoor channels and leveraging her trusted private aides, she initiated a quiet, highly aggressive administrative push to merge her private Clarence House media operatives directly into the core, highly restricted communications hub of Buckingham Palace. Her goal was a staggering exploitation of the king's vulnerability. By taking absolute control of the central press office, Camilla intended to dictate the global output of the monarchy. She planned to heavily prioritize the coverage of her own non-royal children, pushing their private charities and social status into the international spotlight cloaked in the implicit authority of the crown. More sinisterly, this maneuver was a calculated attempt at institutional erasure. It was designed to slowly throttle the media footprint of the Prince and Princess of Wales, pushing William and Catherine into the digital shadows while they were intensely focused on Catherine's medical recovery. Camilla assumed the IT departments and senior press secretaries were simply too intimidated by her title to challenge the sudden, quiet merging of the networks. It was a staggering miscalculation. The modern monarchy, now heavily influenced by the fiercely protective, forensic oversight of Prince William, operates with inescapable precision. William understands that in the 21st century, true institutional power is not just measured in land and jewels. It is measured in the absolute control of the sovereign servers. During a routine top-level cybersecurity audit of the royal network, intelligence officers directly linked to the Prince of Wales flagged a massive, glaring anomaly. The hidden digital footprint exposed Camilla's discreet attempt to hijack the Crown's primary communication infrastructure and subvert the legitimate bloodline. To Prince William, this was not merely an aggressive public relations strategy or a simple bureaucratic overreach. It was a severe security breach and a calculated institutional coup. He saw this as a direct, painful echo of the toxic media manipulation and backroom leaking that had caused his late mother, Princess Diana, so much agonizing paranoia decades ago. Furthermore, it was a direct insult to the uncomplaining sacrifice of Princess Catherine, who has spent over a decade strictly adhering to the rigorous communication boundaries of the institution. To watch his stepmother attempt to exploit his wife's temporary absence for her own commercial and social gain was a definitive red line. William did not scream. He did not engage in a trashy, commercial war of leaks with the tabloids to expose her. Instead, he utilized the cold, majestic, and terrifyingly swift machinery of the state's cybersecurity apparatus to execute a masterstroke of revenge. Working in complete alignment with the highest levels of the royal household and the supreme directors of communications, William bypassed a verbal warning and authorized an immediate total digital quarantine. What looked like a routine system security update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's media empire. In the dead of night, without a single public announcement, the supreme administrative access credentials for Camilla's entire private media team were abruptly revoked. When her closest aides arrived at the Buckingham Palace communications hub the next morning, fully expecting to dictate the global news cycle, they found themselves entirely locked out. Their computer screens flashed red, their server access was permanently denied, and their administrative security passes were downgraded. They were politely but firmly escorted out of the primary press wing and redirected to standard side door entry procedures reserved for non-working staff. Camilla was left staring at a severed connection suddenly suffocated by the staggering realization that the vast, invincible media machine she thought she commanded had just been flawlessly dismantled by the heir to the throne. The trap had entirely snapped shut. The immediate aftermath of this unprecedented cyber security lockout was not marked by a loud confrontation in the private corridors of the palace. It was defined by a chilling absolute silence that rippled through the executive offices of the firm. As Queen Camilla stood in her private apartments, holding the deactivated security passes and listening to the panicked reports of her most trusted media executives, the grand illusion of her absolute authority evaporated. The digital gateways to the monarchy's global megaphone had not just been temporarily closed, they had been institutionally sealed. She realized with cold, dawning horror that she had entirely miscalculated the limits of her own power, underestimating the forensic vigilance of the heir to the throne. In a state of growing desperation, watching her meticulously constructed empire of digital influence unravel in plain sight, Camilla broke the most fundamental rule of royal survival. She panicked. Bypassing the established chain of command and the sophisticated network of private secretaries, she turned instinctively to the one man who had spent 3 decades serving as her ultimate indestructible shield. She marched into King Charles's private study, carrying the physical proof of her staff's sudden digital demotion. She presented the sovereign with the reality of the administrative shutdown, demanding that he unleash his imperial authority to override his son's directives, restore her team's server access, and put the Buckingham Palace communications hub back under her joint control. She expected the king to share her profound moral outrage. For years he had defied his own mother, his nation, and the relentless British press to elevate her status and protect her from the deep undercurrents of institutional resentment. She demanded a fierce reprimand of the Prince of Wales, assuming that Charles would instantly choose the peace of his marriage over the bureaucratic maneuvering of his heir. But as she waited for the king to speak, what she received instead was a devastating, icy silence that changed the reading of everything. Charles did not reach for his pen. He did not summon his private secretary to draft an immediate countermand to the royal IT department. He simply looked at the revised security matrix, entirely aware of the inescapable constitutional trap his son had flawlessly executed. That silence from King Charles was not just a failure of a husband to protect his wife, it was the ultimate institutional betrayal. Charles realized in that singular, agonizing moment that William had not acted out of mere spite. The Prince of Wales had acted within his absolute, undeniable rights to protect the structural integrity of the state's communication apparatus. If Charles were to override a formal cybersecurity directive designed to protect the sovereign network, simply to soothe the wounded ego of his queen and facilitate the PR ambitions of her private staff, he would trigger an internal civil war that his current reign simply cannot afford to wage. Faced with the stark reality of choosing between the structural survival of his dynasty and the public relations ambitions of his wife, the ancient machinery of the monarchy automatically corrected itself. Charles chose the preservation of the Windsor line. His refusal to intervene was an explicit demonstration of the limits of Camilla's power, a silent reminder that while she may share his bed and wear the crown, she does not inherit the sovereign authority of the institution. To understand the absolute terror of Camilla's realization in that moment, we have to look past the historic diamonds and examine the staggering commercial desperation hiding beneath her royal titles. For years, Camilla operated under the illusion that securing the title of queen meant securing an empire, but titles are merely ink on parchment. In the ruthless billionaire-tier reality of the British monarchy, true power is measured in land, in sovereign grants, and in the absolute control of the institutional narrative. And Camilla owns absolutely none of it. She does not control the sprawling, billion-dollar Duchy of Cornwall. William does. She does not own the private estates of Highgrove or Sandringham. The entire financial and structural architecture of the monarchy is designed to pass seamlessly from monarch to heir. Every luxury Camilla enjoys, from the state cars to the highly guarded private apartments, is effectively an institutional lease that is completely dependent on the goodwill of the reigning sovereign and the future king. If Charles were to pass away tomorrow, Camilla would be reduced to a dowager queen, with zero institutional leverage. She would have no sovereign right to the palaces she currently dictates, no control over the royal purse strings, and no blood connection to the reigning monarch. Her frantic, quiet attempt to hijack the central press office was driven by this exact panic. It was a scramble for digital collateral in a game where she holds no real cards. She wanted to establish a dangerous precedent where her family and her private charities held the ultimate proximity to the global microphone, ensuring their commercial viability long after her protective shield vanished. William watched this commercial desperation unfold, let her expose her intentions, and then weaponize the institution's cyber protocol to remind her that she is a temporary guest on a server she does not own. By locking down the digital perimeters, William essentially cut off Camilla's ability to build an independent fortress of influence before the inevitable transition of power occurs. This silent offensive is not merely about protecting a press release, it is about the systematic restoration of a legacy that many believed had been permanently erased. For Prince William, every revoked digital pass and every subtle boundary drawn around the Palace Communications Hub carries a deeply personal emotional weight. It represents the quiet, enduring vindication of his mother, Princess Diana, whose place in history had been systematically marginalized by the very same media operatives Camilla just tried to elevate. William has watched for years as the institution slowly accommodated the woman who manipulated the press to cause his mother immense grief. His current actions demonstrate that while he tolerated the compromise for the sake of his father's peace, He will absolutely not allow those same operatives to control the narrative of his own wife and children. At the same time, this strategic correction serves to secure the undisputed path for Princess Catherine, whose uncomplaining sacrifice and steady commitment to the state have made her the true emotional anchor of the modern monarchy. While Camilla's strategy has always relied on backroom maneuvering, calculated press leaks, and aggressive media management, Catherine has built her status on absolute institutional discipline and genuine public affection. The stark contrast between Camilla's digital desperation and the quiet, dignified resilience of the Princess of Wales has not been lost on the palace establishment. Catherine does not need to hijack the royal intranet to be relevant. She does not need an army of private PR executives to manufacture her popularity. Her absence from the public eye during her medical recovery only amplified her profound importance to the survival of the crown. By wrapping the institutional megaphone in the absolute impenetrable security of his own office, William is honoring the woman who actually sustains the future of the monarchy. The signs of this permanent correction are now everywhere, if you know how to read the subtle clues embedded in royal protocol. What we began to see in the weeks following the digital lockout were devastating administrative shifts that entirely erased Camilla's independent media footprint. It was noticed in the way official palace communications are now structured. Any press release mentioning Camilla's extended family or her private charitable endeavors must now pass through a rigorous, highly scrutinized approval process overseen directly by the Prince of Wales's senior staff. Furthermore, insiders noted that the metadata and digital framing of royal announcements have been subtly recalibrated. Camilla's engagements are strictly contained within the ceremonial boundaries prescribed by the state, devoid of the overarching sovereign tone her private team used to inject. This is not a petty slight. It is a masterful administrative execution. By strictly adhering to the new rules, William severed her access to the illusion of power without ever uttering a single word in public. The psychological impact on Camilla is inescapable. She must now play out the remainder of this reign with the flawless composure required of her rank, standing before the flashing cameras and smiling for the global press. But she does so knowing that the structural foundation of her media power has been completely eroded. She realizes that despite all the strategic campaigns, the backroom deals, and the forced smiles, she is merely a temporary placeholder. The trap has completely snapped shut. The British crown remains undefeated, quietly absorbing personal ambition, resetting its boundaries, and proving once again that true power belongs not to those who manipulate the system, but to those who embody its survival. The future of the monarchy and the absolute control of its global narrative is firmly, undeniably in the hands of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and all Camilla can do now is stand quietly in her borrowed jewels, forced to watch as the digital empire she thought she conquered is handed back to the family she tried to overwrite. Thank you for joining us as we unpack the hidden dynamics of the royal institution. If you appreciate this level of forensic analysis and want to understand the real power plays happening behind closed doors, hit the subscribe button and join our community. We will see you in the next breakdown.